With a yo-ho-ho, it's TaleOfTheToaster. Welcome to another Inazuma 11 tier list, and this time we're going to be taking a look at the teams as a whole that we've played throughout the first 5 games, from the original trilogy right up to Chrono Stones. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but because we have to go in alphabetical order, I have to open on a really poor note. We are opening the list with Almighty Faith, the namesake of the F tier, Almighty Trash. Almighty Faith is just a complete summation of everything that we don't want from an Inazuma team. 11 unlikable players, focusing entirely on violence in a match, also completely overusing fighting spirits back when we were just learning this mechanic and weren't having too much fun with it right out the gate. Yeah, there is absolutely nothing redeemable about Almighty Faith. They are one of my least favourite Inazuma teams of all time, and they would be definitively number 1 if not for Orion. But it's fine, we're not going to dwell on that, because now, after the first F tier, we also get the first S tier, and Alpine is going to lead this way for quite some time to come. They are definitely a contender for my number 1 favourite team. Sean Frost, obviously, is one of the most likeable protagonist characters in all of Inazuma, and he even fills his dynamic within Alpine well, doing both the defence and the forward position in different parts of the match. But then, you know, just having one likeable player isn't enough to get you into the S tier, as we'll soon see with the likes of Eternal Light, for example. Bylong is an S tier character. Is it an S tier team? Well, we'll talk about that, but Alpine is not just Sean Frost. Everyone on this team is so likeable. I mean, look at the picture. They're just a happy bunch of school kids. They're just friends and pleased to be there at all. I've always added an Alpine player or two to my teams whenever I'm playing Inazuma 11 too. Roland Kleimstein is my little favourite, hiding away. So, yeah, Alpine is probably the most confident S tier of the whole list. I'm also going to put the Go version of Alpine in the B tier. They could be as low as C, because I'm a bit mixed on these guys. Like, I think they do fall into that Go 1 trap of being overly serious, and especially when the original Alpine was such a cheery and happy team. To see an Alpine this competitive and full of Imperials from 5th Sector, it did make me a bit sad. But they were also a defensive-focused team, which is good, and they do have a very likeable captain in the end, Nord Snow. He wasn't too likeable in the match itself, so for now I'm going to go C tier, but it might go back up again. But the main thing is they've got Sean Frost as their coach, and Nord Snow has his wonderful accent in the games along with the rest of the team. Ancient Darkness, these guys have a great look to them. And Tezcat obviously makes for a fantastic lead of it. He's a great character and a great captain, but he is the only notable player on Ancient Darkness. Like we say, one person isn't enough to make a team notable, so I'll limit them there. I will obviously give plenty more credit to Eternal Light. Bylong, as you know, is my favourite character from the Go trilogy. I have Jordan Greenway as my favourite from the original seasons, and then Bylong is my favourite from the Go era. But I also, you know, Bylong became my favourite because of how he acted as a protagonist on Chrono Storm and New Inazuma National, things like that. I wasn't actually sold on the guy straight away. You know, I played Go Light, but I had no real opinion on this team other than the fact I couldn't beat them. I only grew to like Bylong once I actually started playing as him and reading him in the Inner Link in Chrono Stones. So I'm going to give it at least B tier because it does have Bylong on it, but absolutely no one else on this team is important. In fact, the goalkeeper I actively don't like. So, you know, I can only drag it so high just because of Bylong. Whereas Chrono Storm, you know, that would get all the boosts from him. Obviously, Zero is the combination of both teams, so I'm going to put that in and around. Zero is, of course, slightly higher. You know, if I was being completely biased, maybe I'd shove them up another team, but let's just leave it there. Especially because we've actually got to get really negative again. There aren't going to be many teams that I dislike in this video. It's going to be almost entirely positive. But Almighty Trash is actually going to have a team from the original trilogy as well, because Apostles from the Sky are just so awkward. Because they're a team of angels, but they're having to be evil. And it's like, that's not how you think of angels at all. They should be, happy, holy people like, well, Zeus from season 1, I guess. But, yeah, they're supposed to be ancient angels, and even within the canon of the games and the anime, these were the heroes that vanquished these other guys, Dark Angels, who are simply not Dark Angels, Devil Army Z, who are meant to be an evil team, and that's what they do, so that's fine, they're all right. But these guys, you were meant to cheer for them in the backstory, but when you actually play against them, they're just horrible to you, and especially the captain. I'm really not keen on him at all. The goalkeeper hurts to look at. I don't really have anything good to say about those guys, sadly. I think they're probably my least favourite team from the original trilogy, but I think they will be the only OG trilogy team in the F tier, because now we get back to the really good stuff. Big Waves is at least a B tier. Again, I could, if I'm being really biased, I could put it in A tier purely because I love the Australian accents in the game. They were wonderful fun to voice act in the Let's Play. Well, I say that. I hadn't really learned the Australian accent properly at the time, so I actually really hated voicing them because I was afraid of messing it up. But by the time of Chrono Stones, I'd practiced it a lot and gave it back to Gammon Checker. But yeah, Dolph Henson is great, and then the rest of his team are cool as well. Apparently, there's even a TaleOfTheToaster lookalike on Big Waves, depending on who you ask. I think the jury's out on that one. I can't believe it. The F tier is the most populated one so far, but we do actually have a team that is technically even worse than Almighty Faith. And I did lie to you, it's from the original trilogy. But I didn't even know who these guys were from looking at the image, but it's Brocken Brigade, the German team found only in the competition routes of Inazuma 3. They were in Group B that you didn't participate in, but it's a German national representative team that is themed entirely around the World War. And considering Inazuma 11 games are sold in Germany and in Europe in general to anyone with any level of sensitivity, yes, I don't really think it's fair to represent the entire German team around their actions in the 1940s. Let's just not do that. Now, the three Chaos teams, they kind of come as a pair, and I'm going to put them all in C tier, I think. My preference of the bunch would be Prominence, simply because I had more playtime in Firestorm over Blizzard, and I have a slight preference for Torch over Gazelle. But I mean, when you look at these images, yes, one was in the anime, one was not, so it really does balance out. And then Chaos obviously had their role in the anime. They have a better goalkeeper than Diamond Dust. They've got Grent. But then the match itself was a complete disaster. It was like 7-5 and it didn't even finish. And it was the most unusual thing you'd watched. But, even if I didn't care for the anime match too much, the YouTube video, that was one of my first ones to really take off in views, because people just weren't capable of playing that match if they didn't have friends with the game. So I owe a lot to Chaos for that one. As a collective unit, they're fine. They're more than just Torch and Gazelle. They at least got fleshed out by stuff like the Ares season and all that. Whereas a Virgin exclusive team that didn't get that treatment, all three of the Chrono Stones ones. Children of the Night at the front, that's the merged team of Nos Fanatica, captained by Desmodus Dracul, and then Luna Howl, captained by Volpine. As captains, I think they're both just okay. Good fun to use in the games because they have such unique moves and skills, and they're just incredibly very good. But as characters, they're nothing to write home about, and they are the only characters on their teams. I mean, all right, I still tried to recruit some in Chrono Stone, and I gave myself attachment to some of them, like Nora Flexion from Nos Fanatica. I do like her, but just in general, I'm not too big on the scary themes. Vampires and werewolves, I'm not bothered about either. And the fact that they didn't even get to be in a movie or the anime meant there's just nothing backing these guys up. Cloister Divinity, they are kind of right on the border. I almost feel like I'm going to need another tier between C and D at this point because I've just seemed so unwilling to use the A tier at all. There will be stuff there, I'm sure. But yeah, Cloister Divinity, they play football purely for the sake of protecting others, and they're not bothered about competition, with the exception of Scott Banyan. And I kind of like that vibe. It makes sense to explain why this team wasn't in the football frontier versus someone like Alpine who just had no explained reason. Well, they did have an explained reason, but it wasn't very good. But yeah, and then they have really fun moves as well, like Flame Breath on the goalkeeper and Kung Fu fighting on the strikers. I think I'm just about going to edge them up here. Now, I think this is going to be the one that gets me in some flames here. But the Dark Emperors, they were your surprise final boss of Inazuma 11 2. And that's cool. I like surprises. I don't think we needed one, though. Genesis was a fantastic finale to the season and the games. And Dark Emperors, yeah, I did like how it was built. Oh, they are good enough for C tier, I'll give them that. Yeah, I liked how they were built up all the way through with teams, players leaving your team throughout the story or getting injured. And I certainly never ever saw it coming. Heck, I used to actually orchestrate when I would beat games on my DS. I used to have a real habit of beating them all at my grandma's. So when I was first playing Inazuma 2, I even waited until I would be visiting my grandma to actually beat Genesis. And then when I did it, I found out, oh, there's another hidden final boss. Well, rip. But yeah, the Dark Emperors, I guess the part that drags it down for me is just how completely glossed over it is after the fact. Once they're brought back to normal, it's, Nathan and all of his lads did some pretty terrible stuff there, and we're just going to pretend that didn't happen? So we've waited all this time to put something in the A tier, and it's really not what you expect. But I am so attached to the Qatar team. I love that Inazuma was able to predict the Qatar World Cup before it was even announced by choosing a team with absolutely zero history in World Cups beforehand, but they chose these guys, and I like them all. I always make sure to use one of my Inazuma 3 playthroughs. I love their special moves, every single one of them. Maybe not Bewilder Blast, but all of the others, and just the match against them in Season 3 is so out of the norm, where Inazuma Japan are actually winning all the way through, and we have goals with regular shots. It stands out like a sore thumb, but in the best way, and their kit is phenomenal. Desperados mean absolutely nothing to me. I at least appreciate that they made use of the Do Please gimmick of Chrono Stones. That's something that these two probably should have done instead of pretending to have unique players. But yeah, I've watched the Inazuma vs LBX movie twice now, and I cannot remember a single thing that happens in that match. Now, Dragon Link is really hard to place because they do a lot of stuff that I like. They have a goalkeeper captain, which is one of my favourite things you can do in Inazuma. They're also a heavily defensive team, and that's especially interesting for a final boss, because the final bosses, I guess with the exception of Nathan Swift here, have always been based around their forwards. In fact, yeah, again with the Dark Emperors, they turned Nathan Swift into a forward for the sake of that final boss. So to have a final team in the tournament that's actually completely about the defense, in fact, they don't even, I think all of their goals in the match just come from regular spirit shots and stuff like that, and the final scoreline's like 3-2. It's very low for a final match. So, and the chess theme is good. I like the kit as well. So there's a lot of good things to say. But at the end of the day, they just totally embody Fifth Sector, who I couldn't give a toss about all the way through this story. And much as I like having a goalkeeper captain, Quentin Cinquedea himself is a character I don't really like much at all. I think the only redeeming things are his Parallel Stones conversation in Chrono Stones, where he burns all the balls, and yeah, they've done well to get to D tier. I've listed off all the good things. I won't harp on what I don't care about because it's just bias at the end of the day, but Yeah, don't like the captain, and then the rest are just kind of there. Now here's a goalkeeper captain done really right. This is another borderline A tier addition. We'll see how much shifting around I do down the line, but yeah, Dave Quagmire de Varlin is someone I've only grown to like more and more with time, after I've realised how much I like goalkeeper captains, after I've gotten accustomed to the guy in the Ares timeline. Everything just makes me like him more and more, and his actual team, they've also got other highlights like Zeke and Mercury. I don't think, is Zeke his name? I might be confusing that with Xenoblade Chronicles too. But this also factors in advanced Epsilon, so you've got the two very different matches between normal Epsilon and then their advanced versions. There's just a lot of positive stuff to say about them. I guess they have my least favourite Alias captain of the three, but he's still like an A-tier character. I like all of the Alias captains, and the other two teams are going to do very well here. Someone who won't really is Farm Junior High, because I keep, by name alone, mixing them up with Wild Junior High. Like, when you've got Warm and Filed, when you've got Farm and Wild, how could you not confuse those two teams? And the good part, again, I love the Infinite Wall and the general defense focus, but they've got nothing beyond that, and there's no real striking designs, bit forgettable apart from the Infinite Wall. Yeah, I'm having to force myself to call them Wild. I've done it again, haven't I? Faux Sure is another one of those Season 2 just good vibes teams. I love that you go around the country to find, one particularly talented player from each, and then most of the other teams, they were just there having a good time. They weren't professionals, they were just amateur football players that you'd have matches against for the fun of it and get to learn about the true talent within them. But Faux Sure, it's just like a regular school. You can totally believe that they didn't get far in the football frontier, but they were just chilling, having a good time in a nice city, and I've got so many good memories of Inazuma too. Yeah, I need to play that game again, man. Fire Dragon is extremely mixed for me. They have one of the worst kits in Inazuma history, I will tell you that one. But they also have one of the better matches in Season 3. The Nationals had been quite a quaint affair up to that point, and then this was a serious deal. I also feel like Fire Dragon should have qualified for the main tournament. Still have the match against Japan in the finals, but then just have the top two get through, and then Fire Dragon could have been in Group B as the other bit of Asian representation, instead of, because they had like 6 different European teams but one representative for Asia. I feel like they could have done a Royal Academy or a Polestar Academy where after the match they just say, oh, by the way, we're both still through, and put Fire Dragon through. But as it stands, I like Changsu Choi. I appreciate that they made an original captain for this team, because they didn't have to, given the main 3 that were on there. But suddenly deciding that Aphrodite is Korean came out of nowhere, and it was later just undone in the Ares timeline as well. While Torch and Gazelle, apparently they're not from South Korea, and they were just invited to join the team by Aphrodite. I've got no good sources on that. I've treated them as well as just being suddenly Korean, but you can just kind of tell that it was made up in a bit of a hurry to have a really threatening opponent for Inazuma Japan at this stage, while also finding a role for these guys without having to actually put them on the team. But I don't know, Aphrodite would have made a fantastic addition to Inazuma Japan, while Torch and Gazelle, yeah, they didn't need to be there. I like having them as an opponent again, but maybe not the Chaos Break. That's still so awkward to look at. Yeah, it's a good team in a rubbish kit with a slightly questionable circumstances on how the members were selected. First Chrono Stones team finally, and I'm going to go pretty generously on Gil. This one, the Mare and Giris pairing. You're not really meant to like them. Like, all the romancy stuff that they do and all of their shots is meant to be very painful to look at, and I'll tell you what, it was a horrendous experience to voice act them in the Let's Plays. But they've also got my boy Zeto over here, and even if this team, you're not meant to care for them too much themselves, but they do have one of my favourite special moves ever in No Future, and they also are part of one of my favourite matches in Inazuma. I like it mainly because of the protagonist team. Seeing Ricardo team up with all the Protocol Omega guys to do this match is the main appeal of it. But even if that's not Gil's fault, I love that match so much that I have to go for at least the B tier for these actual guys, while that particular El Dorado team would just be triple S tier. Love every part of it. Gal, meanwhile, absolutely could have sucked, because, you know, that was the one invented for Faye to be the captain, and it would have been a massive Inazuma trap to just focus simply on Faye and give no characterization to the rest. But actually, they're a really nice, well-designed bunch, and there's other highlights in there as well, like Yurka, and certainly the goalkeeper's very famous for Shikigami lines. There's just enough to prop them up even without Faye. They don't really have one singular defining character without Faye, unless you go for the goalkeeper, specifically the goalkeeper's fighting spirit, shall we say. But yep, there's a lot propping them up. I like them. We're now going to put Genesis in the A tier because it is captained by Jordan Greenway. Yes, I have had to punish Eternal Light for being nothing more than Bylong, but these guys are your first kind of alien opponent team, and you grow attached to them all. These are the guys that trashed your school, but come back to them once they've all been dismissed from Alias Academy, and you feel sorry for them and want to recruit them. And yeah, you know, I only grew to like Jordan Greenway as a character after he became Jordan. That's kind of something I have in common with my two favourites. I grew to like Bylong only after he joined the protagonist team, and I did the exact same thing with Jordan. But I mean, we've got to have somebody in the A tier by now, and how could I not possibly go for the Season 2 Alien team captained by the boy? It's got to be there. Especially when after that, you know, we're talking about the golden oldies, a real high standard here. Inazuma Kids, I actually think they're just about good enough to jump up to the C tier. Millie Moonlight seemed to become a bit of a self-referential meme within Inazuma itself. They clearly really liked using her in all kinds of situations. I love that she's so mean when she's a teenager. But, you know, the actual original timeline where they are the Kids FC, it's just a comforting match to know that in the first game you can always go and take them on. When you know, we were all learning how the game worked for the first time, it helped to just have a team that you could face against and clearly be better than, to just have that learning opportunity. I don't care at all for the Inazuma Kids in Go, but the original ones, yeah, they're pretty good. Meanwhile, the actual Inazuma 11 themselves, yeah, remember these guys? The whole series is named after? Yeah, they were like in one game, and they weren't even the final boss, and then they were the fake Dark Emperors in the games only, in future occasions and that. Yeah, I could definitely see this tier getting split in two at this point, because I like this lot a lot more than I like this lot. But I would like Inazuma 11 a lot more if the designs were just a bit more varied. They look okay as grown adults, but there's also the secret hidden young Inazuma team in the competition routes where you take them on as they would have looked as, you know, normal Raimon's age. But they all just look kind of the same. It was very clear that they were all designed to be regular looking adults, and they had not planned for what they would look like as younger players, because they look so awkward. And I'm trying to imagine young Inazuma being the protagonists of their own story, and it just would not work. Kirkwood, we can once again give credit to the fact it's not just the striker, it's the three Murdoch brothers. Yeah, you can still kind of treat them as one player really, but they still have the likes of Malcolm Knight but backing them up in the defence. I'm always up for a bit of their German anime accents or the like stuff in the games, so how could I not put Kirkwood in the B tier? While actually, it's even harder to rate the Go ones, because they've got the strong Liverpudlian accent in that game, and I love hearing them talk. Bay Laurel's actually one of my favourite captains from Go Season 1. Giving them Aphrodite as a coach was a nice touch. I just didn't care too much for the Langford brothers and their little argumentative dynamic. If you take those two away, then suddenly I really, really like Kirkwood from Go. Just, they have that limiting factor in the end. Little Gigantes is next, and I have spoken publicly before about how I don't like the way Hector Helio runs out of goal to go and be a forward with X-Blast all of a sudden. I think that was a bit unnecessary and contrived and hurts really with the rivalry between him and Mark Evans. I think it would have been much better if they just kept him in goal. Still, I liked having Keenan DeFortune as well, the reserve goalkeeper. He was an awesome Darren parody. But at the end of the day, I've thought about it. Could I possibly limit Little Gigantes to a lower tier than they deserve just because I don't like Hector Helio going on the offence? No, I probably shouldn't. I mean, it's obviously a roadblock to the S tier, I guess, but the fact that these guys are just African Raimon OG Season 1 guys, the designs are perfect, but then they also kind of change the focuses around. They've got their own version of Kevin and Axel, but it's the fake Kevin that's actually the big striker, while Axel's just kind of off to the side in this team. And the influence of Dave Evans as a coach is so important. Just the match in general was a brilliant ending to Season 3. I only have that one gripe. It's a pretty big gripe, but everything else about them I love. Lunacy Military Academy, they're pretty good. It's a relatively Imperial-free match, which is always welcome. I do, however, think that they should have been the opponent in the regional finals rather than the first opponent of the Nationals, but we'll discuss that a little bit more as we drag in Pirates Cove Merchant Marine Academy, because I'm not keen on these guys at all. They're not bad enough for F tier, they're not almighty trash. In fact, I know quite a lot of people that do like the captain, Davy Jones. Shout out to Dragon Blaze for his particular liking, but I mean, he was immediately ruined by the dub name. How can you literally just call the character Davy Jones? That is not a pun, that is a reference. It's a direct name drop. And I personally found his story a little contrived, how he was just always striving to be the best in the 5th sector, and I'm the true Imperial to end them all, and I'll be the best. And they had quite a fun gimmick being the Pirates team. That could have made for a really fun comedy team. But instead, these pirates are played off to complete serious effect in the general kind of overly serious tone of Go 1 in general. They did not vibe well at all. It was a total clash. They were the final opponent of the regionals, so they should have been a huge challenge to overcome and get Raimon out of the regionals and into the nationals. But instead it was just this bunch of pirates, except you couldn't have a laugh with them because they were all being 5th sector violent and extremely good with all of their fighting spirits everywhere. And Davy Jones was just on a mission to be the best Imperial with his rubbish name. I just didn't really like anything about them, and I think I'd like them more if they swapped places with Lunacy Merchant Military Academy, whatever you want to call them. Because the Dodge who betrayed and left your team in the regionals, he could have been your final opponent for that chapter of the story before you then move on to bigger and wider things. I mean, it even makes sense from a relocation perspective. He moved out of Raimon School, so he could have just gone to the happens to be quite nearby Lunacy, whereas instead this bunch of pirates just happen to be in the same area as Raimon, and you're meant to take them dead seriously, and I can't. They would have been perfect, and then that could have just been a throwaway team to open up the regionals. But anyway, that's that. So here's the actual comedy water team. I'm specifically going to put them in second or third? Second, because Hurley Kane literally joined this team the day before you play them, and he's already good enough to play football with them. But the coach is so funny, how he just forgot to sign up for the Football Frontier, how he fancies Coach Lena. That's great, and we've not even gotten to the actual team yet. That's just praising the coach. This is more than just Hurley. They've got Caden Soundtown, one of my favourite little under-the-radar characters who would have been such a good candidate for Inazuma Japan, even if he didn't get on the team. I would have loved to have him in the selection match, because he's genuinely talented. and just fun to watch in the match and play as in the games. And they're all just so happy. Again, it's another one of those Season 2 good vibes teams that you're just happy to meet in such a good area as well. I love touring around Okinawa. I could honestly consider giving them the boost here. I'll keep them at the top of the A tier, but there will be S tier teams to come, I promise. The amount of times I've seen Milky Way Charter and called them Almighty Faith speaks volumes, really. This team is not as bad as Almighty Faith. Let's put these in reverse order so that's a bit clearer. So Almighty at the second worst, Brock and Brigade in actual last place. And then these guys are, they have Imperials and Fighting Spirits, but less of them. The captain is at least a nice guy, so he's a redeeming thing, but I don't care for anyone on this team other than Kirk, and he's just completely overshadowed by the 5th Sector people who are just being boring opposition for Raimon to defeat in the slow start of Raimon. And then it just only gets worse with this match, which is so similar, but with increased violence. Just get me past that part of the story. And finally, I don't really like Mirage either. Whenever I mention that I'm not too keen on Harry Houdini, I always get a couple people in the comments sticking up for him, which is nice, but I certainly can't remember any players on this team other than Harold Houdini. I guess they've got like the 2 twin-looking people that are forwards. I'm really struggling here. I like Faith. Faith's nice, but she's not technically part of the team. So, yeah, the Magic theme is nice. The Pinball Arena's nice, but I don't feel confident in calling them trash. But they are, along with Pirates Cove, definitely at the bottom of this tier. Mount Olympus is your fake final boss, and they are good at doing that. They definitely looked believable as a final boss. They looked a bit unoriginal as well. It was like B-Tech Zeus. But as soon as you found out they weren't the real final boss, it's okay for the final boss to be a B-Tech Zeus. If anything, it's quite a nice reference, and Cronus is a good guy. He deserved better. Neo National, I am putting... Ooh, this is hard. I'm going to settle for right next to Epsilon. That's a fun coincidence. But again, Quagmire makes this team. I love the entire arc here where Inazuma National's spot is actually in jeopardy. We've got some all-stars like Coach Lena, Joseph King, and Dave Quagmire suddenly banding together to make a genuinely reasonable threat. Some of the Genesis guys as well. Yeah, the whole time that you're against this team, I'm really enjoying watching it. I would put them in the A tier more confidently if there weren't kind of some more glaring omissions. Like some of the defenders, for example, they just feel like they've been handpicked out of nowhere. Or, well, kind of half the team, really. You could name about 66% of the players on that team, and then the others, maybe not so much. I like that Zeke's back there to be Quagmire's right-hand man again, but there are others you could choose, like, say, stick Caden Soundtown on it. Well, I don't think he'd try to overthrow Hurley. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh, actually. They did make a concentrated effort to pick, people that would be willing to try and dethrone you from your spot. I can't exactly ask your best mates from Faucheur. Go on then, let's do it. It's fun to speculate about who could have been in it, whether you agree with the choices or not. Just the discussion in general is great fun. And hey, they picked the Occult guy as well. Speaking of which, I've got to put Occult in the almighty trash, simply for, again, how many people it turned off the series. Whenever I bring up Occult in a video, I always split the comments in half, especially on my Iceberg one. There's like a top-rated comment that says, I'm glad I wasn't the only one who struggled with Occult. And then with just as many likes, there's another comment that says, I don't think Occult were that hard. People really just swing one way or the other with it, but trust me, the amount of message boards I've seen, the amount of personal struggles I had with that match, and the fact that enough people would like the comments every time I bring up Occult's difficulty. Yes, there were a lot of people that found it way too difficult. It was a huge difficulty spike, and even if you're ignoring the games, what else can I really say about Occult? They actively hampered Inazuma's player base by turning off people who couldn't beat them. And Team Ogre are just alright, you know? They're meant to sell the game, and they just about did it. I wasn't doing it for Team Ogre themselves. They didn't look mightily interesting, and as it turned out, yeah, they weren't. But, yeah, I like the uniforms, and they're not bad. But now, yes, we have another S tier, and this is an easy addition. Orpheus is one of the best things that Inazuma 11 has ever done. In fact, this tier list in general, it's supposed to be rating the opponent's teams, but to even think of Orpheus as an opponent team is very, very challenging. They were secondary protagonists. If you binned off Inazuma National, or if they just lost, I would happily watch the rest of the season with Paolo Bianchi as the main character, even with Ray Dark, sure. They are helped by the fact they got a lot of screen time. If they were just earlier in the story and you only had one match against them, then they wouldn't be S tier, but they were given all those episodes within their own camp, and Paolo Bianchi having his own little narrative. You did get to play as part of their team, and sure, it's an unfair advantage again, but it really does help make you like them. You could probably, by design, remember every single member of that team because they were so reinforced. And then the match they had against Raimon, the one that ends in a draw in the anime, is possibly the best match in Inazuma history. I would have confidently said that it was, in fact, but now, when we get to talk about Ares and Orion on this channel in the future, there are now contenders for the best match. But within the first 6 seasons, I firmly believe Inazuma Japan versus Orpheus is probably the most enjoyable match in the whole anime. Oh, Paolo Bianchi, why weren't you in GO? Otaku gets a lot of slack, and I don't get it. I really like Otaku. I think they're very funny. They're not meant to be good at football, but I don't want to punish them for that. At the end of the day, they're still Inazuma 11 characters in that universe. I don't have to judge them as footballers. I could just have fun reading their bios in the game, see what their actual interests are, and say how much I like them based on that. They've got so many appealing members, and the actual match against them was hilarious. Seeing Willie Glass get his moment is something we never expected, but I would never take it away. And in comes the personal bias once again. Perfect Cascade is going to drop nicely into the A tier, and by all means, they should not. I definitely shouldn't have them anywhere near there. They're just a literal team of robots with no personality whatsoever, and a coach that I just like for no particular reason. And they only have the 2 matches anyway. Why do I like them? I just love Chrono Stones, man. I love their moves. The artificial shadows look fantastic. And then RX, when he gets his little moment in the match against Gal. RX alone jumped up to one of my favourite characters of the season. And then his team is basically a bunch of RXs. So if I were to rate these objectively, then the C tier is probably the limit, but I just like them too much to ignore. Alright, we'll put them at the top of B tier behind Bylong's teams, but only because there's going to be more from Chronostones to come. Should we just do that now then? Protocol Omega 1, A tier. Protocol Omega 2, slightly lower, but pretty much equal, because yes, Alpha is gone. I like Beta slightly less, but I still like her. But then Mike gets to be like a main character in Protocol Omega 2, which I find very funny. And then Protocol Omega 3, because you never actually got to face them when they were not Miximax, and it was definitely more of a Xanark team than it was Protocol Omega. They get to be a lot lower. I nearly put them in the C tier, but I had to remember once again that yes, Mike is still on this team. Somehow he evaded getting kicked off 3 separate times and is part of all Protocol Omega teams. I once again shouldn't have Protocol Omega this high, because Chrono Stones has a very objective problem in that the entire first half of the story is constituted entirely of playing against this one team. Yes, they're technically 3 teams, but they've all got the same name and much of the same players. it's an objective problem. It made the game feel extremely unvaried in comparison to previous seasons where you've got a new team every chapter. But I will take it because I just love the team itself so much. Especially when you get to play as them. Pretty much any member of Protocol Omega you want, you get to play as in that Ragnarok chapter, which just solidified them for me. And so many of my favourites are on here. Not just Mike, but Alpha, Gamma I like as well. The Goalkeeper Hotel, I could name them all. And the fact that they're also named after the phonetic alphabet, I think that's brilliant. I wish I mentioned it in my Let's Play. I don't think I'd quite clocked onto it at that point, but they've genuinely helped me learn the phonetic alphabet. That's a real world skill that I can attribute to an Inazuma team. So let's even specifically move them up to... Yeah, they're willing to overtake Alien Janus. If that was normal Jordan, they wouldn't be doing it. Let's put them here. Love them. Prodigy Grammar, it is funny that they exist. They're not meant to be likeable. I'm not going to put them into the bad tiers just on the basis of that. They did exactly what was needed of them. Knights of Queen is only really good enough for the D tier, in complete honesty. Like, I am English, as you can tell, so I was very, very excited to meet the English team in Inazuma when I was playing the game for the first time. And I'm grateful that we got one. You know, one of Inazuma's biggest audiences is in the Netherlands, and they never got a team in the original trilogy, in Go, or even in Ares and Orion when there was a second chance to have a Dutch team. They are criminally underrepresented by the series. England at least did get a team, but they were a tad unremarkable. And that's fine, they were the first actual opponent within the Nationals, but Edgar Partenus isn't too likeable himself. Not too many of the designs are that great. Yeah, they're just alright. Ragnah, or the Lagoon if you prefer. Let's go for a reasonably high spot in the B tier. I will go behind Geel, but still within that tier as well. The big waves can beat them as the big waves can jump to there. But yes, I have a few flaws. I don't get why they're all named after animals, because they certainly don't resemble it. But I think the reasoning is, you know, Simeon can turn into a monkey, so presumably all of these guys can as well. But we never saw that, so it's either unconfirmed or it's a lost potential. And I also think it's quite strange that they did make a brand new team, because I don't think the Hyper Evolved Children were planning on having a tiebreaker match. They were trying to win this tournament 3-0. So yeah, the fact that they were keeping back their supposed strongest players to only use in this final match didn't really make sense. I think it would have probably been fine to just have a collection of the three teams we'd already faced and just put them together into one mega team. But finally having Simeon on the pitch is so big. And at least Mare and Giris were there to back them up. Not too bothered about the rest of the team, but it is an experience taking this team on. Probably my favourite conclusion to a game. Not necessarily my favourite conclusion to an anime season. That would probably be season 3. But yeah, the full just hour of playing against the Hyper Evolved Children. Oh yes. Now, I made this irrelevant but fine tier right at the beginning, and it's only now coming into effect, despite the fact this is in alphabetical order. We have the Spanish team Red Matador, then we've got this team which is the Revolutionaries, just a game-exclusive team made up of various bits of the Saintsway teams, and then you've also got Rose Griffin. 3 teams in a row, alphabetically, who either don't appear in the anime at all, or if they do, then they didn't even get a full match. I wanted Irrelevant but Fine to be its own tier, because you can't punish these guys for not being an important part of the series. If they did get the Orpheus treatment, then we would probably love them all, but because they are just little hidden subsets, Cape Crusaders as well, for example, they're just going to kind of sit in their own tier. Royal Academy, though, you can't really put them too low. Every member of Royal Academy is important. If there were any members of the team that weren't important during the original trilogy, then Ares made them important instead. All of the players on this team have done something important, and so many would become staples. Jude is one of the most important characters ever. Sanford would end up on Inazuma National. Joseph King always should have been there and is one of the most famous and loved goalkeepers. Gus Martin is a walking meme. Peter Drent was an Inazuma National candidate in the manga. They're all so important, and the music is brilliant. While Royal Academy Redux, I'm just impressed that they made a brand new team at all. You know, when you think Royal Academy Redux, you'd think it was mostly just the same players again, but slightly back to the dark side. But no, they're all pretty much original characters like Argy Bargy and Fishman. Love just the random ones that you can latch onto and then recruit. And of course, Caleb Stonewall I'm very keen on, but it's C tier because they're not too memorable outside of Caleb, Joseph and Sanford, who are also part of other teams as well. While, to be honest, Royal Academy from Go, I can't really avoid. I'll put them at the top of the E tier. I like that they're all named after British universities and they still carry the legacy of Royal Academy. I do like the goalkeeper, Preston Princeton, so the one that's not an Imperial. Even the actual Imperial one wasn't bad for Imperial standards, but I can tell you almost nothing about the Go Royal Academy. There's such a sharp contrast from this Royal, where every single member is important and remembered, versus the Go one where you can barely remember a single one outside of the two goalkeepers. They had a big legacy to live up to, and they just couldn't, really, which isn't entirely their fault, but you know, what am I going to do? Put them in D tier and call them all right? Well, the Secret Service, I'm going to call them great, but only because of Acrobat Bomber. Like, really, they are C tier maximum, but they've got such funny moves like Aikido and especially Acrobat Bomber that they put in the anime too. Yeah, and the costumes and Tori, and yeah, there's enough to put them in B tier. Let's roll with it. Shuriken is probably the most unremarkable team of Season 1. They're pretty much all memorable teams in that game, apart from maybe Farm, but then Shuriken, it's just, let's have a team of ninjas, and then they lose, and they have some of the least interesting Hisatsus of any team ever. The Street Sallies should not be doing this, but I'm nearly putting them in A tier. I'm going to go with B, but it's, again, mandatory that at some point in an Inazuma playthrough, you just pick a random member of the Street Sallies and add them to your team, because they're just normal people. Their bios aren't about football at all, or when they are, it's like the chef character. His wife gets angry at him for making a football-shaped loaf. All of their bios are so mundane, and the designs are just normal dudes that you can really get behind. They're just an irrelevant match, but they bring to the table some fun characters that you can kind of develop your own personalities for. You're given a vague bio to go off, and then you can self-insert whatever you want upon them. And that's just one of my favourite things to do in this series, so the Street Sallies get my thumbs up. And the Osaka Girls, I'm going to go for the C tier. I like that they were taken seriously. They weren't one of the strongest teams that Raimon ever came up against, and they made no secret of it, but they also weren't bad. They definitely had some good players, and then Sue, I think, is one of the most underrated characters in the series history. They just had some good fun moments. Can't say I've got much personal attachment in using members of the team, but maybe someday in the future I will. Team D is going to somewhat latch off the success of Orpheus, but anything to do with the Italy arc from Season 3 immediately gets a bonus. This is an entirely separate Italian team. Again, Netherlands never even got one team in Inazuma, and then for Italy you've got Orpheus, you've got Team D, and those rubbish losers from Orion as well. But this one, yeah, you get to see them introduced as villains under radar, but they are brought to the good side. And yeah, the transformation of Demonio going from a Jude ripoff to just back to his normal self, it's so heartwarming. And the match itself is one of my favourite parts of the game, because you're actually playing as Orpheus rather than the normal Inazuma National. Oh, it's all around just a great time. Argentina, I'm gonna shove towards the front of the A tier. considered S, I'm not going to lie, but the only team to have beaten Inazuma National and never lost to them. That's such a critical point in the story. It kind of sucks in the game because you barely even get to play much of the match, but seeing your protagonists lose in Inazuma is great. Maybe not so much when it's just like the aliens in Protocol Omega, you just beat them 17-0 until you get you do like 2 weeks of training and then suddenly you can contend with these guys. Now this was a World Cup level, just straight up they got outplayed. Sure, they had a lot of their key players like Mark and Jude missing, but I really wanted to have Darren in his own spotlight match, and yeah, he let in too many goals and ultimately they lost, but that's cool, and they've got a defender captain which is criminally underdone. The Genesis is also nice and A tier because so many of these guys are important. Like, just looking at the picture, you've got your captain, Xavier, who's a series staple. Nero's an amazing goalkeeper. That guy was on Inazuma National, Neo National. That guy was on Neo National. Bellatrix is another fan favourite. I could go through them all. Like, this guy, was he on the Ares team? No, I don't think so, but I'm making that up. They were such a good final boss, and then they weren't the final boss, but they still feel like it. Because I've got way more attachment to this match than I do to the Dark Emperors, and I'm going to give them full credit. Brazil, meanwhile, was let down a little bit by the fact the story was having to get serious at this point to deal with Zulan Rice. It is a struggle to watch all the bad things that this team have to go through with the bribery and the families being kidnapped, and the majority of their match is not enjoyable because of all the necessary bad stuff that's going on. But when you're having that pure moment of just playing against Brazil, when they've let their worries go and they can finally be happy, it is a moment of euphoria. So it's like 75% not that enjoyable, but then 25% bliss. And it works out to C tier in the end because, we can't judge them only on that match. They're also a fun team besides which. So our umbrella, we don't even have a good picture of Unicorn. I'm actually only going for the D tier here. And I think that's mainly because I started with the games. If I watched this team in the anime, then I probably would have taken them dead seriously. Because this is Eric and Bobby's team, along with the new characters Mark and Dylan. But it's less intimidating for a game player because, in the anime, Eric's part of your team in Raimon, and then he carries over into Season 2. So he's always been important, and then Season 3 he actually gets to be a major player of the team where he suddenly levels up to become one of the best players ever. Meanwhile, in the games, Eric is an entirely missable and optional recruit in the first game that most people did miss. He was semi-optional in Inazuma 2. You didn't have to have him on your team until he was absolutely necessary just to move the Sue Heartland plot forward, and then he lost his relevance after that. And then in Inazuma 3, you were supposed to care when suddenly he was the leading player of Unicorn, and he's always been this. He's made out to be. He's always been this big part of our team. Was he? We didn't even have him really for the past 2 games. And then, the extra additions, Mark and Dylan, they're fun, but they didn't add too much. So ultimately, due to the way I first played them, I couldn't attach myself too much to them, sadly. Universal is another classic example of I love the captain. Sol Daystar is fantastic, and a lot of people like the goalkeeper as well, but I have nothing to say about the other players. The White Deer was your one match in Chrono Stones that wasn't Protocol Omega in the entire first half of the game. They weren't important or particularly memorable, but they were a team that wasn't Protocol Omega, and that was all we asked for. Wild is brilliant fun. We are not talking about Farm anymore. I'm still figuring out which one I'm supposed to be saying, but one of my favourite things in Inazuma 1 and 2, and 3 to an extent, is just recruiting players for your team, reading the dialogue that they have to say while you take them on, and nothing's more fun in that experience than recruiting players of... I'm thinking about the name... of Wild Junior High. I got there. I've probably recruited every single player from this team because they've all got hilarious dialogue when you have their little recruitment matches. Just picking up every member of this team is such a fun experience. Reading the dialogue, reading the bios. I can't move them into the S tier or anything because the actual match against them was nothing special. But yeah, for the recruitment process, they are deserving of A tier. Zanark's domain is just alright. I am very biased towards Protocol Omega, so the team that directly succeeded them wasn't too special. I thought it was very strange that Zanark has literally just escaped out of prison and now he's managed to find another 10 bozos to play football with him. They should have just been duplies. That was clearly within Zanark's capabilities. The fact that they're meant to be actual real humans that have no significance before or afterwards, I find that a little too strange. And then Zan, the actual team that he plays for in Ragnarok, is also D tier for kind of different reasons. This time there is more characterization to the rest of the team. They're part of the hyper-evolved children, and I love the dynamic that Zanark actually doesn't like playing for them because the other guys on the team are jerks. But it's because the team's full of those jerks that just love being violent and barging people out of the way and shooting people that I can't actually put them too high. Zanark's the only member of the team that I do like, and then even he doesn't like that team, but it's certainly at least D tier. Zeus was a fantastic final boss. That was real masterclass in action. Do I go B or do I go A? I think I will go for A if I move the big waves. That's the one I've been looking at this whole time. I've been trying to judge, right, what's the quality of the A tier right now? What's the quality of the B tier right now? And every time I think, well, I put big waves in here, so I guess I've got to limit them. So let's just flipping move the big waves up already. It's complete bias. They don't deserve to be there at all, but I just like them. Whereas Zeus, just perfect final boss material. It's set up Aphrodite as a fan favourite for years to come. Don't need to say much more than that, really. But flipping heck, guys, that's actually the whole list. I didn't realise we were done. That's the list. Does anyone deserve the jump to S tier? I think this is... The top three here are probably in order. Go on then. Protocol Omega 1 can be the one to make the jump, and I guess you kind of have to move Protocol Omega 2.0 with them. That will be what I go with. And then I love these three. Those can be my front runners for A tier, while the rest are certainly in attendance on quality alone. But I think Alpine and Orpheus, those are definitely my top two from the first 5 games. Of course, there are also teams that I completely adore in Ares, in Orion, in Go Galaxy. And when we eventually cover those seasons on the channel as well, we'll be able to add even more to the S tier. But for now, this is what I've got. And be sure to do the tier list for yourself and let me know what you think of all these teams. Put them on your favourites. We've also got the Raimon ones here. I didn't think it would be fair to include them because, they're all amazing. They have an entire season of development. They're literally all S tier. But if I were to put them in order just down here for the sake of it, Inazuma National is a clear number 1. Then I think Chrono Storm is enough to overtake the original Raimon, but not enough to overtake the Season 2 team that had Sean and Darren on it, while the Go 1 team can be at the back, but it's still a Raimon team, it's still good. But thank you to TheDamBeaver for making the tier list generator, and I look forward to seeing your own versions below. Peace.